PSY-MODULE2, Research Strategies. PSY-MODULE2, Research Strategies, How Psychologists Ask and Answer Questions. Driven both by curiosity about others and the desire to understand their own concerns, millions turn to psychology. They read advice columns to cope with their problems, overcome their addictions, and save their relationships. They attend stop smoking hypnosis seminars, play supposedly brain-strengthening online games, and observe as celebrity psychics display their alleged powers. Many immerse themselves in self-help books, websites, and lectures that promise secrets to love and happiness and shortcuts to success. Others, intrigued by claims of psychological truth, wonder, how and how much does parenting shape children's personalities and abilities? Are firstborn children more driven to achieve? Do dreams have deep meaning? Do we sometimes remember events that never happened? Does psychotherapy heal? In working with such questions, the science of psychology does more than speculate. To separate uninformed opinions from examined conclusions, psychologists use the scientific method to conduct research. Let's consider how psychology's researchers do their science. The need for psychological science. Learning objective question LOQ 2-1. How does our common sense sometimes lead us to a wrong conclusion? Some people think that psychology is mere common sense documenting in scientific jargon what people already know. You get paid for using fancy methods to tell me what everyone knows. Indeed, our intuition is often correct. As the baseball great Yogi Berra, 1925-2015, once said, you can observe a lot by watching. We also have Berra to thank for other gems, such as nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded, and if the people don't want to come out to the ballpark, nobody's gonna stop them. Because we're all behavior observers, it would be surprising if many of psychology's findings had not been foreseen. But what are the limits of common sense? And might common sense also lead us astray? 3 common flaws in common sense thinking: hindsight bias, overconfidence, and perceiving order in random events illustrate how, as novelist Madeleine L. Engel, 1973, observed, the naked intellect is an extraordinarily inaccurate instrument. Did we know it all along? Hindsight bias. Consider how easy it is to draw the bullseye after the arrow strikes. After the stock market drops, people say it was obviously in a bubble and due for a correction. After an athletic match, we credit the coach if a gutsy play wins the game and criticize the same poor judgment if it doesn't. After a mass shooting, we fault those who didn't foresee and forestall the culprit's action. After a romantic breakup, it seems clear that the relationship was doomed from the start. Bleskuri et al., 2023. Although history may therefore seem like a series of inevitable events, the actual future is seldom foreseen. No one's diary recorded, today the 100 Years' War began. In hindsight, research findings often seem obvious. If a romantic couple's time apart weakens their attraction, well, of course, out of sight, out of mind. If separation strengthens their attraction, well, obviously, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Are groups wiser than individuals? The more the merrier, or more error-prone? Too many cooks spoil the broth. Do we feel more drawn to people like ourselves, birds of a feather flock together, or to those who differ, opposites attract? After the fact, whatever we find may seem like proverbial common sense. Such errors in people's recollections and explanations show why we need psychological science. It's not that common sense is always wrong. Rather, common sense describes, after the fact, what has happened better than it predicts what will happen. More than 800 scholarly papers, published over 50 years, have shown hindsight bias in people worldwide from preschool to old age. Bernstein, 2021, Fischhoff, 2025, Rose and Vos, 2012. As physicist Niels Bohr reportedly jested, prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. Overconfidence. We humans tend to think we know more than we do. Asked how sure we are of our answers to factual questions, is Boston north or south of Paris, we tend to be more confident than correct. Answer below. Our confidence sometimes leads us to reject scientific evidence about issues we only dimly understand, Light et al., 2022. For example, people who know the least about genetically modified foods tend to think they know the most, Fernbach et al., 2019. And our confidence often drives us to quick rather than correct thinking, Rana et al., 2020. Answer, Boston is south of Paris. Consider these three anagrams, shown beside their solutions, from Goranson, 1978. Read rightward arrow water. Etrin rightward arrow entry. Grabe rightward arrow barge. About how many seconds do you think it would have taken you to unscramble each of these? Does hindsight influence your guess? Knowing the answers tends to make us overconfident. Surely, finding the solution would take only 10 seconds or so. In reality, the average problem solver spends 3 minutes, as you also might, given a similar anagram without the solution, OXA. Answer may be found below. Fun anagram solutions from Wordsmith. Sad face. Snooze alarms equals alas. No more Z's. Dormitory equals dirty room. Slot machines equals cash lost in M. Are we any better at predicting social behavior? Psychologist Philip Taitlock, 1998-2005, collected more than 27,000 expert predictions of world events, such as whether Quebec would separate from Canada. His repeated finding, these predictions, which experts made with 80% confidence on average, were right less than 40% of the time. As a former Microsoft CEO stated in 2007, there's no chance that the iPhone is going to get any significant market share. Answer to anagram above, chaos. Overconfidence in history. Not within 1,000 years will man ever fly. Wilbur Wright, in 1901, 2 years before he and his brother, Orville, made the first powered flight. Computers in the future may weigh no more than 1.5 tons. Popular Mechanics, 1949. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance. General John Sedgwick just before being killed during a U.S. Civil War battle, 1864. No woman in my time will be Prime Minister. Margaret Thatcher, 1969, British Prime Minister, 1979 to 1990. Ask yourself. Do you have a hard time believing you may be overconfident? Could overconfidence be at work in that self-assessment? How might reading this section about overconfidence help reduce your tendency to be overconfident? Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Perceiving order in random events. We humans are pattern seekers, eager to make sense of our world. People see a face on the moon, hear hidden messages in music, or perceive the image of Jesus on a slice of toast. Social media influencers marvel at the synchronicity of related seeming events and see signs from the universe in three-digit angel numbers. Even in random data, we often find patterns, because here's a curious fact of life: random sequences often don't appear random. Falk et al., 2009, Nickerson, 2002, 2005. Flip a coin 200 times and you may be surprised at the streaks of heads and tails: a 1 in 4 chance of a 7-head streak and a 1 in 6 chance of a 10-head streak, much like supposed hot and cold streaks in basketball shooting and baseball hitting. In actual random sequences, patterns and streaks, such as repeating letters, occur more often than people expect. Gronkai and Sloman, 2021. This also makes it hard for people to generate random-like sequences. Treisman and Faulkner, 1987. When embezzlers try to simulate random digits when specifying how much to steal, their non-random patterns can alert fraud experts. Poundstone, 2014. The really unusual day would be one where nothing unusual happens. Statistician Percy Diaconis, 2002. Some happenings, such as 2 people in a family sharing a birthday, seem unlikely but possible. With 50 people in a group, there is a 97% chance. Other events, such as winning a lottery twice, seem so extraordinary as to be impossible. But with a large enough sample, say statisticians, any outrageous thing is likely to happen. Diaconis and Mosteller, 1989. Baseball spectator Alice Roth understood. In 1957, Philadelphia Phillies hitter Richie Ashburn hit a foul ball that injured her. As she was being carried out of the stadium on a stretcher, Ashburn hit her again with another foul ball. Seidemann, 2017. The point to remember: we trust our gut feelings more than we should. Fighting falsehoods with psychological science. LOQ 222. Why are people vulnerable to misinformation, and how can psychological science help? In 2025, an expert panel rated misinformation and disinformation as the next 2 years' biggest global threat, surpassing even societal polarization. World Economic Forum, 2025. Consider the impact of misleading misinformation, whether intended or not, and of intentionally false disinformation. Misinformation makes us fear the wrong things. Nearly every year from 1989 to 2024, an era of decreasing crime, most U.S. adults have told Gallup that, compared with a year ago, there was more crime. And despite immigrants being arrested and imprisoned for crime less often than native-born Americans, nearly half of Americans have believed that immigrants worsen the crime situation. Abramitsky, 2024, Crawford, 2023, Gallup, 2023. Misinformation kills. Compared with those of their age who were fully vaccinated during the COVID pandemic, those unvaccinated or not fully vaccinated much more often died of COVID, yet they feared it less. Giattino et al., 2023, Ward, 2021. Misinformation rationalizes war. A reported 2/3 of Russians approved of Vladimir Putin's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, which he claimed was a peacekeeping operation to liberate Ukraine from Nazi oppressors. Dickinson, 2022. Ukraine has a Jewish president whose relatives died in the Holocaust. Misinformation fuels conspiracy theories. Millions of people have been persuaded of evil secret plots, that vaccines have embedded microchips, or that an election was stolen via dead people's voting. Some even believe that the 9/11 terrorist attacks or the Sandy Hook school massacre were hoaxes. The result: fiercely divided voters, public outrage, and domestic terrorism. Sternisko et al., 2020. Misinformation has reached crisis proportions. It poses a risk to international peace, interferes with democratic decision-making, endangers the well-being of the planet, and threatens public health. Carl Bergstrom and Jevin West, in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, 2021. Why do people succumb to misinformation? Why do people so readily come to believe what isn't so? Psychological scientists have focused on processes that can hijack people sorting fact from fiction, leading them to believe what isn't so. Fake news flies. The Internet lends wings to misinformation, Adams et al., 2023. In one analysis of 126,000 stories tweeted by 3 million people, falsehoods spread significantly farther, faster, deeper, and more broadly than the truth, Vozui et al., 2018. In an analysis of 123 fact-check stories posted online by 2 million people, falsehoods and ambiguous information reappeared 13 times more often than accurate and precise information, Kauk et al., 2025. Misinformation that makes people outraged spreads especially fast, McLaughlin et al., 2024. As essayist Jonathan Swift foresaw in 1710, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. This fake news flies effect is particularly problematic when it comes to disinformation, deliberately planted lies, or AI-generated images. The abundance of falsehoods means that doing your own online research often misleads. Aslet, 2024. People who feel insecure and lonely are more prone to believing misinformation, but we all share information online in an effort to connect with others. Biddlestone et al., 2025, Cosma et al., 2025. So the next time you read or post online, pause and ask yourself whether your need to belong may be overshadowing your desire for accurate information. Our default setting is to believe what others say. Our human default setting is to trust others. Katsur and Poston, 2023. Mostly, other people are useful information sources. But not always. Scammers deceive. Schemers mislead. Indeed, it is easier to come to believe something than it is to stop believing something. In experiments, people have more readily been persuaded to believe something than, once they believe, to unbelieve. Yang et al., 2022. As Benjamin Franklin, 1782, knew, people are much more easily deceived than undeceived. Repetition breeds belief. In experiments, statements become more credible when repeated. What people hear over and over gets remembered, and comes to seem true, a phenomenon called the illusory truth effect. Fazio and Sherry, 2020, Vellani et al., 2023. Even implausible statements, elephants run faster than cheetahs, become more plausible with repetition. Lakasan et al., 2022. What's familiar feels factual. Vivid examples stay mentally available. A mass killing, horrific murder, or plane crash leads the news with vivid images that stay readily available in our memory. Although capturing our attention, headlines fill our minds with what's atypical. As journalists joke, we don't cover the planes that land. Small wonder that people greatly overestimate their risk of experiencing these horrors. We are motivated to confirm our own beliefs. People tend to feel overconfident in their own intuitive judgments and to resist correction. Motivated reasoning leads people to justify their existing beliefs. Confirmation bias inclines people to expose themselves to news commentary, social media, and websites that support their views. We welcome evidence that confirms our prior beliefs, and we discard evidence that contradicts them. Dries et al., 2025. When we search online or use AI, we often use search terms that support what we already believe. Lung and Erminsky, 2025. Moreover, the less expertise people have in a specific area, the more likely they are to overrate their knowledge. Echo chambers polarize opinions. People often seek out and befriend those who reinforce what they already think, creating an opinion echo chamber. Crockett, 2017. On social media, we tend to friend and follow those who think as we do. Sinelli et al., 2021, Figure 2.1. Social media exchanges among like-minded people often amplify attitudes and inflammatory emotions. Haidt and Bale, 2023. Thus, in the United States, the percentage of Democrats and Republicans who viewed the opposing party as very unfavorable tripled between 1994 and 2022, from 19 to 58%. Pew, 2022. How not to drown in the misinformation sea, keeping truth afloat with psychological science. Faced with a fire hose of falsehoods, we can resist. We can remember that most of us misperceive ourselves as comparatively invulnerable. M. Chen et al., 2023. We can filter incoming information with critical thinking and a scientific mindset. We can be wary of the persuasive power of repetition, of vivid but misleading anecdotes, of motivated reasoning, and of like-minded polarization. We can winnow evidence with open-minded curiosity, skepticism, and humility. And we can assist others by debunking and prebunking falsehoods. Debunking. Imagine that a friend or classmate worries that, as one myth asserts, COVID vaccines contained microchips to track citizens. Imagine also that you know better that this falsehood stems from false news shared on social media and podcasts. Reuters, 2020. Should you rebut the claim with evidence? Or would that backfire, causing your friend to double down and defend the myth more strongly? Debunking, if done smartly, possibly even through dialogue with a trained AI chatbot, will help more than hurt when it communicates a scientific consensus. Costello et al., 2024, Danielson et al., 2025, Van Stekelenburg et al., 2023. Start with a spirit of kindness by showing respect and empathy for the person's intentions and worldview. Ask about the source for the belief. In the Debunking Handbook, 2020, psychologist Stefan Lewandowski and colleagues advise using a truth sandwich, a 4-step process that begins and ends with the truth. Fact. Lead with a clear, simple assertion, such as no study has shown that COVID vaccines contained microchips to track people. Myth. Acknowledge the belief, some people do worry that these vaccines contained microchips. Fallacy. Explain why that is misinformation. Social media and podcasts made the claim, but they were exposed as fraudulent. Fact. Restate, and leave people with the truth. Many people got COVID vaccines, and no scientific evidence indicates that these vaccines contained microchips or are being used to track people in any way. Prebunking. Debunking won't always be persuasive. Misinformation, once implanted, can be hard to erase. But as in medicine, prevention is better than cure. So an even better strategy is to prebunk, to inoculate and protect people from likely future misinformation. Van der Linden, 2023, 2024, Figure 2.2. Preemptively forewarn people about manipulative techniques, about deepfake digital images and videos, or about a falsehood, and equip them with pertinent evidence. Much as a medical inoculation, a weakened virus activates our body's defenses to prepare for a full-blown virus, such misinformation vaccines can prepare us to resist untruths. Google has experimented with prebunking by offering internet videos that teach people how to spot false claims before they encounter them. Klepper, 2023. In Europe, for example, they debunked misinformation about the war in Ukraine and its refugees. Another effective debunking strategy is to create and share a visual replica of a deceptive message, with an embedded debunking message known as a poison parasite. That way, the next time people view the deceptive message, it will also remind them of the associated counterargument. In 7 experiments, counterarguments to misinformation were more effective when associated with the deceptive communication, figure 2.3. Those who were forewarned were forearmed. The good news is that we can combat misinformation by embracing a scientific mindset. Mindful of our own biases, we can observe and learn. Confronted with an opposing view, we can discuss before we dismiss. And with a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and humility, we can adopt the spirit of critical thinking. To accept everything is to be gullible, to deny everything is to be a cynic. The best way we can transcend ideology is to teach our students, regardless of their majors, to think like scientists. Psychologist, and former Yale University president, Peter Salovey, Knowledge Can Be Power, 2018. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. The scientific method. The foundation of all science is an attitude that combines curiosity, skepticism, and humility. Psychologists complement this scientific attitude with the scientific method, a self-correcting process for evaluating ideas with observation and analysis. Psychological science welcomes hunches and plausible-sounding theories. And it puts them to the test. If a theory works, if the data support its predictions, so much the better for that theory. If the predictions fail, the theory gets revised or rejected. When researchers submit their work to a scientific journal, peer reviewers, other scientists who are experts, evaluate a study's theory, originality, and accuracy. The editor then uses the peer reviews to determine whether the research meets the journal's standards for publication. Constructing theories. LOQ 2-3. How do theories advance psychological science? In everyday conversation, we often use theory to mean mere hunch. Someone might, for example, discount evolution as only a theory, as if it were mere speculation. In science, a theory explains behaviors or events by offering ideas that organize our observations. A theory summarizes and simplifies by using principles to organize isolated facts. As we connect the observed dots, a coherent picture emerges. The stronger our theory, the better it can guide us toward clear, testable questions that lead to new discoveries. A theory of how sleep affects memory, for example, helps us organize countless sleep-related observations into a short list of principles. Imagine that we observe over and over that people with good sleep habits tend to answer questions correctly in class and do well at test time. We might therefore theorize that sleep improves memory. So far, so good. Our principle neatly summarizes a list of observations about the effects of a good night's sleep. Yet no matter how reasonable a theory may sound, and it does seem reasonable to suggest that sleep boosts memory, we must put it to the test. A good theory produces testable predictions, called hypotheses. Such predictions specify which results would support the theory and which results would disconfirm it. To test our theory about how sleep affects memory, we might hypothesize that when people are sleep deprived, they will remember less from the day before. To test that hypothesis, we might assess how well people at a sleep laboratory remember information they studied before, either a good night's sleep or a shortened night's sleep, figure 2.4. The results will either support our theory or lead us to revise or reject it. Our theories can bias our observations. Having theorized that better memory springs from more sleep, we may find what we expect, we may perceive sleep-deprived people's answers as less accurate. The urge to find what we expect is strong, both inside and outside the laboratory. In the end, our theory will be useful if it, 1. Organizes observations and, 2. Implies predictions that anyone can use to check the theory or to derive practical applications. Does people's sleep predict their retention? Eventually, our research may, 3. Stimulate further research that leads to a revised theory that better organizes and predicts. As a check on their own biases, psychologists use precise, measurable operational definitions of research procedures and concepts. For example, researchers might clarify that, for their study, sleep-deprived means that a person slept at least 2 hours less than their natural sleep duration. Likewise, a study of aggression may observe how many pins you stab into a doll that represents a lab partner, or a study of helping may record dollars donated. By using carefully worded statements, others can repeat, the original observations with different participants, materials, and circumstances. If they get similar results, confidence in the findings' reliability grows. The first study of hindsight bias, for example, aroused psychologists' curiosity. Now, after many successful replications with differing people and questions, we feel sure of the phenomenon's power. Replication is confirmation. Replication is an essential part of good science. Over a decade, psychologists attempted to replicate 307 studies. They could reproduce similar results 64% of the time, Nosek et al., 2022. Replication failures often occur when effects are small. Our behaviors are typically influenced by many factors having small effects, or when samples are small, Gandhi et al., 2024. So psychologists increasingly study large samples, sometimes collaborating with many researchers, Blake and Gangestad, 2020, Psychological Science Accelerator, 2023. A bigger sample equals a better chance of replication. Failure to replicate is not a bug, it is a feature. It is what leads us along the wonderfully twisty path of scientific discovery. Lisa Feldman Barrett, Psychology is Not in Crisis, 2015. More and more psychologists use pre-registration to publicly communicate their planned study design, hypotheses, data collection, and analyses, Center for Open Science, 2025. This openness and transparency deters researchers from running lots of statistical tests and then reporting only the significant results, or later changing the hypotheses to fit the data, which would be like drawing the target bullseye after the arrow lands. Rather than pressuring researchers to publish only the results that support their predictions, pre-registration also encourages psychologists to openly report all of their methods and results, whether their findings support their hypotheses or not. The process thus allows other labs to precisely repeat an experiment. Psychological science also harnesses the power of meta-analysis. By combining the results of many studies, researchers avoid the problem of small samples and can get a broader understanding of what they are studying. Replications, collaborations, pre-registrations, explorations, and meta-analyses are all enabling psychology's renaissance of improved scientific practices, Nelson et al., 2018. As we will learn next, we can test our hypotheses and refine our theories using descriptive methods, which describe behaviors, often through case studies, surveys, or naturalistic observations, correlational methods, which associate different variables, and experimental methods, which manipulate variables to discover their effects. To think critically about popular psychology claims, we need to understand these methods and know what conclusions they allow. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Description. LOQ 2-4. How do psychologists use case studies, naturalistic observations, and surveys to observe and describe behavior, and why is random sampling important? The starting point of any science is description. In everyday life, we all observe and describe people, often drawing conclusions about why they think, feel, and act as they do. Psychologists do much the same, though more objectively and systematically, through case studies, in-depth analyses of individuals or groups. Naturalistic observations, recording the natural behavior of many individuals, and surveys and interviews, asking people questions. The case study. Among the oldest research methods, the case study examines one individual or group in depth in the hope of revealing things true of us all. Some examples. Brain damage. Much of our early knowledge about the brain came from case studies of individuals who experienced particular impairments after damage to a certain brain region. Children's minds. Pioneering developmental psychologist Jean Piaget taught us about children's thinking after carefully observing and questioning only a few children. Animal intelligence. Studies of various animals, including a few chimpanzees, have revealed their capacity for understanding and language. Intensive case studies are sometimes revealing, and they may suggest directions for further study. But atypical individual cases may mislead us. Both in our everyday lives and in science, unrepresentative information can lead to mistaken judgments and false conclusions. Indeed, anytime a researcher mentions a finding, smokers die younger, 95% of men over 85 are non-smokers, someone is sure to offer a contradictory anecdote. Well, I have an uncle who smoked 2 packs a day and lived to be 89. Dramatic stories and personal experiences, even psychological case examples, command our attention and are easily remembered. Journalists understand that and often begin their articles with compelling stories. Stories move us. But stories can mislead. Which of the following do you find more memorable? 1. In one study of 1,300 dream reports concerning a kidnapped child, only 5% correctly envisioned the child as dead. Murray and Wheeler, 1937. 2. I know a man who dreamed his sister was in a car accident, and 2 days later she died in a head-on collision. Numbers can be numbing, but the plural of anecdote is not evidence. As psychologist Gordon Allport, 1954, p. 9, said, given a thimbleful of dramatic facts we rush to make generalizations as large as a tub. The point to remember, individual cases can suggest fruitful ideas. What's true of all of us can be observed in any one of us. But to find those general truths, we should trust representative data more than anecdotes. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. This video, Case Studies, offers a helpful tutorial animation. Naturalistic observation. A second descriptive method involves recording responses in natural environments. These naturalistic observations have included watching chimpanzee societies in the jungle, videotaping and analyzing parent-child interactions in different cultures, recording racial differences in students' self-seating patterns in a school lunchroom, or viewing nonverbal behaviors in job interviews. Until recently, such naturalistic observation was mostly small science possible to do with pen and paper rather than fancy equipment and a big budget. Provini, 2012. Now, rather than asking people to report their symptoms on a questionnaire, mental health professionals can ping people in real time to sample their experiences. Mink et al., 2025. Big data: the vast amount of information harvested from people's phone apps, social media, online searches, and more have transformed naturalistic observations into big science. Fitness trackers and smart home devices produce vast amounts of data about people's activity, relationships, sleep, and stress, which offer increasing possibilities for researchers. Hines et al., 2022. Such data are typically kept anonymous. Researchers can study the data, but they do not have any personally identifiable information on individual users. In one big data study, anger predicted heart disease. Negative emotion, especially anger-related, words in 148 million tweets from 1347 U.S. counties predicted the county's heart disease rates and did so better than other predictors, such as smoking and obesity rates. Eaststead et al., 2015. Like the case study, naturalistic observation does not explain behavior. It describes it. Nevertheless, descriptions can be revealing. We once thought, for example, that only humans use tools. Then naturalistic observation revealed that chimpanzees sometimes insert a stick in a termite mound and withdraw it, eating the stick's load of termites. Such unobtrusive naturalistic observations paved the way for later studies of animal thinking, language, and emotion. Thanks to researchers' observations, we know that chimpanzees and baboons use deception. Psychologists repeatedly saw one young baboon pretending to have been attacked by another as a tactic to get its mother to drive the other baboon away from its food. Whiten and Byrne, 1988. Naturalistic observations also illuminate human behavior. Here are two findings you might enjoy. A funny finding. We humans laugh 30 times more often in social situations than in solitary situations. Provini, 2001. Have you noticed how seldom you laugh when alone? Culture and the pace of life. Naturalistic observation also enabled Robert Levine and Aaron Norenzayan, 1999, to compare the pace of life, walking speed, the accuracy of public clocks, and so forth in 31 countries. Their conclusion: life is fastest paced in Japan and Western Europe, and slower paced in economically less developed countries. Naturalistic observation offers interesting snapshots of everyday life, but it does so without controlling for all the factors that may influence behavior. It's one thing to observe the pace of life in various places, but another to understand what makes some people walk faster than others. Nevertheless, descriptions can be revealing. The starting point of any science is description. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. This video, Naturalistic Observation, offers a helpful tutorial animation. The survey. A survey examines many cases, asking people to report their behavior or opinions. Questions about everything from sexual practices to political opinions are put to the public. Here are some recent survey findings. Compared with young adults of an earlier generation, those born in the 1960s and 1970s, twice as many young adults born in the 1990s have reported having no sexual partners. 2023. Across 24 countries, 1 in 2 people reported believing in the existence of intelligent alien civilizations in the universe. Lampert, 2017. 55% of all humans, some 4.51 billion people, say that religion is very important in their lives. Evans, 2024. But asking questions is tricky. People may shade their answers in a socially desirable direction, such as by underreporting their cigarette consumption or overreporting how often they vote. And the answers often depend on how a researcher's questions are worded and how respondents are chosen. Wording effects. Even small changes in the order or wording of questions can make a big difference. When U.S. white evangelical Christians were asked whether 1. humans have evolved over time, or 2. Humans have existed in their present form since the beginning of time. Only 32% expressed a belief in evolution, Funk, 2019. But 68% expressed a belief in evolution when asked whether 1. Humans have evolved over time due to processes such as natural selection, God or a higher power had no part in this process. 2. Humans have evolved over time due to processes that were guided or allowed by God or a higher power. Or 3. Humans have existed in their present form since the beginning of time. Because wording is such a delicate matter, critical thinkers will reflect on how a question's phrasing might affect people's expressed opinions. Random sampling. In everyday thinking, we tend to generalize from samples we observe, especially vivid cases. An administrator who reads, 1. A statistical summary of an instructor's student evaluations and 2. The annoyed comments of 2 irate students may be influenced as much by the biased sample of 2 unhappy students as by the statistical summary of many favorable evaluations. The temptation to succumb to the sampling bias to generalize from a few vivid but unrepresentative cases, such as long-lived, long-time smokers, is nearly irresistible. So how do you obtain a representative sample? Say you want to learn how your fellow students feel about online learning. It's often not possible to survey the whole group. How then could you choose a group that would represent your college or university's total student body? Typically, you would seek a random sample, in which every person in the entire population has an equal chance of being included in the sample group. You might number the names in the school's student roster and use a random number generator to pick your survey participants. Sending each student a questionnaire wouldn't work, because the conscientious people who returned it would not be a random sample. Large representative samples, often around 1,500 people when national surveys are conducted, are better than small ones, but a smaller representative sample of 100 is still better than a larger unrepresentative sample of 500. You cannot compensate for an unrepresentative sample by simply adding more people. Political pollsters sample voters in national election surveys just this way. Without random sampling, large samples such as from opt-in website polls often give misleading results. But by randomly sampling people from all areas of a country, polls can provide a reasonably accurate snapshot of the nation's opinions. In today's world, however, with so many people not answering phones, door knocks, and emails, getting this random sample is a challenge. Even so, final presidential pre-election polls, by weighting respondents to match the overall voting population, usually fall within about 4% of the outcome. Reiki, 2023, Van Dam, 2024. With very large samples, estimates become quite reliable. The letter E is estimated to represent 12.7% of the letters in written English. E, in fact, is 12.3% of the 925,141 letters in Melville's Moby Dick, 12.4% of the 586,747 letters in Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, and 12.1% of the 3,901,021 letters in 12 of Mark Twain's works. Chance News, 1997. The point to remember: before accepting survey findings, think critically. Consider the sample. The best basis for generalizing is from a representative, random sample. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Correlation. LOQ 2-5. What does it mean when we say two things are correlated, and what are positive and negative correlations? Describing behavior is the first step toward predicting it. Naturalistic observation and surveys often show us that one trait or behavior tends to coincide with another. In such cases, we say the two Correlate. A statistical measure, the correlation coefficient, or R, helps us figure out the direction and strength of the relationship. Knowing how much aptitude test scores correlate with school success tells us how well the scores predict school success. A positive correlation, above 0 to R equals plus 1.00, indicates a direct relationship, meaning that two things increase together or decrease together. For example, height and weight are positively correlated. A negative correlation, below 0 to R equals 1.00, indicates an inverse relationship, as one thing increases, the other decreases. Negative correlations could go as low as R equals 1.00, which means that, like people on opposite ends of a teeter-totter, one set of scores goes down precisely as the other goes up. A coefficient near zero indicates little or no relationship. This animated tutorial offers a helpful overview of correlational studies. Psychological researchers often ask how strongly two variables are related. How closely related are the personality test scores for identical twins? How well do intelligence test scores predict career achievement? Do people's depression levels predict their anxiety? In such cases, scatter plots can be very revealing. Each dot in a scatter plot represents the values of two variables. The three scatter plots in Figure 2.5 illustrate the range of possible correlations from a perfect positive to a perfect negative. Perfect correlations rarely occur in the real world. A correlation is positive if two sets of scores, such as for height and weight, tend to rise or fall together. A negative correlation isn't bad. It simply means two sets of scores relate inversely, one set going up as the other goes down. The correlation between people's height and the distance from their head to the ceiling is strongly, perfectly, in fact, negative. Saying that a correlation is negative also says nothing about its strength. Statistics can reveal what we might miss with casual observation. To demonstrate, consider the responses of 2,291 Czech and Slovakian volunteers who rated, on a 1 to 7 scale, their fear and disgust related to each of 24 animals, Polak et al., 2020. With all the relevant data right in front of you, Table 2.1, can you tell whether the correlation between participants' fear and their disgust is positive, negative, or close to zero? When comparing the columns in Table 2.1, you might not detect much of a relationship between fear and disgust. In fact, the correlation in this example is positive, R equals plus 0.72, which becomes clear when we display the data as a scatter plot, Figure 2.6. If we fail to notice a strong relationship when data are presented systematically as in Table 2.1, how much less likely are we to notice relationships in everyday life? To detect what is right in front of us, we sometimes need statistical illumination. We can easily find evidence of gender discrimination when given statistically summarized information about job level, seniority, performance, gender, and salary. But we often perceive no discrimination when the same information dribbles in, case by case, Twiss et al., 1989. Single events or individuals catch our attention, especially if we want to confirm, or deny, bias. In contrast, statistics calculate patterns by counting every case equally. Now, for a big remember this forever lesson, correlation need not imply causation. Just because two things vary together doesn't mean they cause each other. Consider the strong positive correlation, R equals plus 0.55, found in 117 countries between the number of heavy metal bands and citizens' life satisfaction levels, Dempsey, 2021, Halliwell et al., 2022. For whatever reason, heavy metal-loving countries are happy countries, but that does not mean the music causes the happiness. Or consider a national health study that, after following more than 10,000 adults over a decade, reported an interesting correlation. Compared to those who never or rarely had sex, married couples who had sex at least once a week were about half as likely to have died. CAOETAL, 2020. The study also controlled for 20 other variables, such as age, income, and tobacco use. So, can we safely say that sex saves lives? Or can you imagine other possible explanations for the correlation? Perhaps healthier people are more sexually active? Or perhaps a third factor, a supportive, committed relationship contributes simultaneously to good health and frequent sex? The point to remember, unlike experiments, correlation coefficients tell us nothing about cause and effect. But they can help us understand the world more clearly by revealing the extent to which two things relate. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Illusory correlations and regression toward the mean. LOQ 2-6. What are illusory correlations, and what is regression toward the mean? Correlations make clear the relationships we might otherwise miss. They also keep us from falsely assuming a relationship where there is none. When we believe there is a relationship between two things, we are likely to notice and recall instances that confirm our belief. If we believe that dreams forecast actual events, we may notice and recall confirming instances more than disconfirming instances. The result is an illusory correlation. Illusory correlations can feed an illusion of control that we can personally influence chance events. They can also feed superstitious thinking. Gamblers, remembering past lucky rolls, may believe they influenced the dice by throwing gently for low numbers and hard for high numbers. We also struggle to separate fact from fiction due to a statistical phenomenon called regression toward the mean. Extreme results, such as an exceptionally low exam score, are caused by unfortunate combinations: exam topic, question difficulty, sleep deprivation, the weather. The same combination likely won't occur on the next exam, raising the probability of a higher score. Simply said, extraordinary happenings tend to be followed by more ordinary ones. Unusually high or low grades will usually regress towards students' average grades. And a team's unusually poor performance in one game will usually improve in the next. Failing to recognize regression, we may believe we have more control over situations than we actually do. After berating a team for poorer than usual performance, a coach may, when the team regresses to more typical play, think the scolding actually worked. After lavishing praise for an exceptionally fine performance, the coach may be disappointed when a team's behavior migrates back toward its average. Ironically, then, regression toward the average can mislead us into feeling rewarded after criticizing others, that criticism really made them work harder, and feeling punished after praising them, all those compliments made them slack off. Tversky and Kahneman, 1974. Once you become sensitized to it, you see regression everywhere. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman, 1985. The point to remember, when a fluctuating behavior returns to average, fancy explanations for why it does so are often wrong. Regression toward the mean is probably at work. Moreover, although correlational research helpfully reveals relationships, it does not explain them. If teen social media use correlates with, predicts, teen risk of depression, that may or may not indicate that social media use affects depression risk. Other explanations are possible. More on this in Thinking Critically About Correlation and Causation. LOQ 2-7. Why do correlations enable prediction but not cause-effect explanation? Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Experimentation. LOQ 228. What are the characteristics of experimentation that make it possible to isolate cause and effect? Happy are they, remarked the Roman poet Virgil, who have been able to perceive the causes of things. Let's consider how psychology's varied methods can together illuminate the cause of an alarming social trend: the soaring depression rate among teens, especially girls, CDC, 2023, figure 2.7, which has led to a more than doubled rate of youth hospitalization for attempted suicide or self-injury, Araklian et al., 2023. Given that increased teen mental health challenges have coincided with broadening availability of smartphones and social media access, psychologists Jonathan Haidt, Zach Roche, and Jean Tweng, 2025, wondered if social media is a culprit. Screen time displaces face-to-face interactions and sleep. And social media prompts comparisons with our online friends, who seem to party, travel, and enjoy life more. To assess possible social media harm, Haidt and his colleagues assembled the evidence from 4 psychological science methods: correlational, longitudinal, experimental, and quasi-experimental. Correlational. First, they asked, does time spent on social media correlate with teen mental health? In 78% of the 97 studies they considered, the answer was yes. The modest overall correlation becomes dramatic when considering only girls' social media exposure, as in the British data in Figure 2.8, Kelly et al., 2018. Longitudinal. Second, they asked, does social media use at time 1 predict mental health at time 2? Maybe. Among 57 longitudinal, over time, studies, the answer was yes for 37 of them. Experimental. What do such findings mean? Is there a cause-effect connection, perhaps above a certain amount of screen time? Should parents limit their teens' screen time? Even big correlational data from a million teens couldn't tell us. To identify cause and effect, researchers. Experiment. Experiments enable researchers to isolate the effects of one or more variables by 1. Manipulating the variables of interest and 2. Holding constant, controlling, other variables. To do so, they often create an experimental group in which people receive the treatment, such as reduced screen time, and a contrasting control group in which they do not. To minimize any pre-existing differences between the two groups, experimenters randomly assign people to each condition. Random assignment, whether with the random number generator or by the flip of a coin, effectively equalizes the two groups. If 1/3 of the volunteers for an experiment can wiggle their ears, then about 1/3 of the people in each group will be ear wigglers. So, too, with age, intelligence, attitudes, and other characteristics, which will be similar in the experimental and control groups. Thus, if the groups differ at the experiment's end, we can surmise that the treatment had an effect. Note the difference between random sampling, which creates a representative survey sample, and random assignment, which equalizes the experimental and control groups. So, what do experiments reveal about the relationship between teens' social media use and their risk of depression and self-harm? One experiment identified nearly 1,700 people who received instructions to deactivate their Facebook account for 4 weeks, whereas other participants were told not to change their social media habits, Alcott et al., 2020. Compared with people in the control group, those randomly assigned to the deactivation group spent more time watching TV and socializing with friends and family, and they reported lower depression, and greater happiness and satisfaction with their lives, and less post-experiment Facebook use. These results are consistent with Haidt, Roche, and Tweng's review. Out of 44 experiments, 80% showed a causal effect of social media use on mental health outcomes. This video, random assignment, offers a helpful tutorial animation. Quasi-experimental. Finally, Haid, Roche, and Tweng asked, did the timing of social media arrival predict mental health? A quasi-experiment is a research design used to evaluate an intervention without the use of random assignment. In this case, Haid, Roche, and Tweng reviewed studies that examined whether the rollout of Facebook on a campus or the arrival of high-speed internet in a community was followed at that location by increased mental health problems. In 80% of these quasi-experiments, as social life moved online, mental health declined, especially for girls. These correlational, longitudinal, experimental, and quasi-experimental findings illustrate how psychological science explores life-relevant questions. The robust research supports a compelling conclusion: extended social media time is a major cause of mental health decline, especially for teen girls. Haid, 2024, argued that the rise of smartphones with addictive social media apps has helped to create the anxious generation. Now is the time to make the school day phone-free, says Haid, 2023, in order to improve educational outcomes and reduce rates of depression, anxiety, and self-harm. But stay tuned, some researchers question the scale of the social media effect, and research is ongoing. Procedures and the placebo effect. Consider how we might assess therapeutic interventions. Our tendency to seek new remedies when we are ill or emotionally down can produce misleading testimonies. When we have a cold, we might take zinc tablets. If we find our cold symptoms lessening, we may credit the pills rather than the cold naturally subsiding. In the 1700s, bloodletting seemed effective. When the patient actually survived, this treatment was credited for the recovery. When patients didn't survive, the practitioner inferred the disease was too advanced to be reversed. So, whether or not a remedy is truly effective, enthusiastic users will probably endorse it. To determine its actual effect, we must control for other variables. And that is precisely how new drugs and new methods of psychological therapy are evaluated. Investigators randomly assign participants in these studies to research groups. One group receives a pseudo-treatment, an inert placebo, perhaps a pill with no drug in it. The other group receives a treatment, such as an antidepressant medication. You can think of the placebo versus the actual drug as trick or treatment. The participants are often blind, uninformed, about what treatment, if any, they are receiving. If the study is using a double-blind procedure, neither the participants nor those who administer the drug and collect the data will know which group is receiving the treatment. In double-blind studies, researchers check a treatment's actual effects apart from the participants and the staff's belief in its healing powers. Just thinking you are getting a treatment can boost your spirits, relax your body, and relieve your symptoms. This placebo, Latin for I shall please effect, is documented in Reducing Pain, Depression, and Anxiety, Atlas and Wager, 2012, Kirsch, 2010. Athletes have run faster when given a supposed performance-enhancing drug, McClung and Collins, 2007. Decaf coffee drinkers have reported increased vigor and alertness when they thought their brew had caffeine in it, Dawkins et al., 2011. So, to assess a therapy's actual effectiveness, researchers must control for a possible placebo effect. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Independent and dependent variables. Here is an even more potent example. The drug Viagra was approved for use after 21 clinical trials. One trial was an experiment in which researchers randomly assigned 329 men with erectile disorder to either an experimental group, Viagra takers, or a control group, placebo takers given an identical-looking pill. The procedure was double-blind. Neither the men taking the pills nor the person giving them knew what participants were receiving. The result, at peak doses, 69% of Viagra-assisted attempts at intercourse were successful, compared with 22% for men receiving the placebo, Goldstein et al., 1998. Follow-up experiments replicated Viagra's helpful effect, Fink et al., 2002. Viagra performed. These simple experiments manipulated just one variable, the drug, Viagra versus no Viagra. We call this experimental variable the independent variable because we can vary it independently of other variables, such as the men's age, weight, and personality. Other variables that can potentially influence a study's results are called confounding variables. Random assignment controls for possible confounding variables. Experiments examine the effect of one or more independent variables on some measurable behavior or mental process, called the dependent variable because it can vary depending on what occurs during the experiment. Both variables are given precise operational definitions, which specify the procedures that manipulate the independent variable, the exact drug dosage and timing in the study, or measure the dependent variable, the men's responses to questions about their sexual performance. These definitions offer enough precision that others can replicate the study. Figure 2.9 outlines the Facebook experiment design. Let's pause to check your understanding using a simple psychology experiment, to test the effect of perceived ethnicity on the availability of rental housing. Researchers sent identically worded email inquiries to 1,115 Los Angeles area landlords, Carpuser and Loges, 2006. The researchers varied the sender's name to imply different ethnicities and tracked the percentage of positive replies, invitations to view the apartment in person. Patrick McDougall, Said Al-Rahman, and Tyrell Jackson received, respectively, 89%, 66%, and 56% invitations. In this experiment, what was the independent variable? The dependent variable? Answers below. We must guard against not just racial slurs, but against the subtle impulse to call Johnny back for a job interview, but not Jamal. U.S. President Barack Obama, eulogy for state senator and church shooting victim Clementa Pinckney, June 26, 2015. Experiments can also help us evaluate social programs. Do early childhood education programs boost the chances for success among children from economically disadvantaged backgrounds? What are the effects of different anti-smoking campaigns? Do school sex education programs reduce teen pregnancies? To answer such questions, we can experiment. If an intervention is welcomed but resources are scarce, we could use a lottery to randomly assign some people, or regions, to experience the new program and others to a control condition. If later the two groups differ, the intervention's effect will be supported. Passel, 1993. Answers to question in previous paragraph. The independent variable, which the researchers manipulated, was the implied ethnicity of the applicants' names. The dependent variable, which researchers measured, was the rate of positive responses from the landlords. Let's recap. A variable is anything that can vary: social media exposure, erectile function, landlord responses, anything within the bounds of what is feasible and ethical to measure. Experiments aim to manipulate an independent variable, measure a dependent variable, and control confounding variables. An experiment has at least two different conditions, an experimental condition and a comparison or control condition. Random assignment works to minimize pre-existing differences between the groups before any treatment effects occur. In this way, an experiment tests the effect of at least one independent variable, what we manipulate, on at least one dependent variable, the outcome we measure. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. These videos, experiments and confounding variables offer helpful tutorial animations. Research design. LOQ 2-9. How would you know which research design to use? Throughout this book, you will read about amazing psychological science discoveries. But how do psychological scientists choose research methods and design their studies in ways that provide meaningful results? Understanding how research is done, how testable questions are developed and studied is key to appreciating all of psychology. Table 2.2 compares the features of psychology's main research methods. In other modules, we discuss other research designs, including twin studies and cross-sectional and longitudinal research. In psychological research, no questions are off-limits, except untestable, or unethical, ones. Does free will exist? Are people born evil? Is there an afterlife? Psychologists can't test those questions. But they can test whether free will beliefs, aggressive personalities, and a belief in life after death influence how people think, feel, and act. Deschesne et al., 2003, Sheriff et al., 2014, Webster et al., 2014. Having chosen their question, psychologists then select the most appropriate research design: experimental, correlational, case study, naturalistic observation, twin study, longitudinal, or cross-sectional, and determine how to set it up most effectively. They consider how much money and time are available, ethical issues, and other limitations. For example, it wouldn't be ethical for a researcher studying child development to use the experimental method and randomly assign children to loving versus abusive homes. Next, psychological scientists decide how to measure the behavior or mental process being studied. For example, researchers studying aggressive behavior could measure participants' willingness to blast a stranger with supposed intense noise. Researchers want to have confidence in their findings, so they carefully consider confounding variables other than those being studied that may affect their interpretation of results. Psychological research is a creative adventure. Researchers design each study, measure target behaviors, interpret results, and learn more about the fascinating world of behavior and mental processes along the way. To help you build your understanding, your critical thinking, and your scientific literacy skills, we created online research activities in Achieve. In these How Would You Know activities, you get to play the role of researcher, making choices about the best ways to test interesting questions. Some examples: how would you know if having children relates to being happier? And how would you know if people can learn to reduce anxiety? Ask yourself, if you could conduct a study on any psychological question, which question would you choose? How would you design the study? Here is a synopsis of psychology's scientific research methods. Predicting everyday behavior. LOQ 2-10. How can simplified laboratory experiments help us understand general principles of behavior? When you learn about psychological research, do you ever wonder whether people's behavior in the lab will predict their behavior in everyday life? Does detecting the blink of a faint red light in a dark room say anything useful about flying an airplane at night? After viewing a violent, sexually explicit film, does a man's increased willingness to push buttons that he thinks will deliver a noise blast to a woman really say anything about whether viewing violent pornography makes a man more likely to abuse a woman? Before you answer, consider, the experimenter intends the laboratory environment to be a simplified reality, one that simulates and controls important features of everyday life. Just as a wind tunnel lets airplane designers recreate airflow forces under controlled conditions, a laboratory experiment lets psychologists recreate psychological forces under controlled conditions. An experiment's purpose is not to recreate the exact behaviors of everyday life, but to test theoretical principles. Mook, 1983. In aggression studies, deciding whether to push a button that delivers a noise blast may not be the same as slapping someone in the face, but the principle is the same. It is the resulting principles, not the specific findings, that help explain everyday behaviors. When psychologists apply laboratory research on aggression to actual violence, they are applying theoretical principles of aggressive behavior, principles they have refined through many experiments. Similarly, it is the principles of the visual system, developed from experiments in artificial settings, such as looking at red lights in the dark, that researchers apply to more complex behaviors such as night flying. And many investigations show that principles derived in the laboratory do typically generalize to the everyday world. Mitchell, 2012. The point to remember: psychological science focuses less on specific behaviors than on revealing general principles that help explain many behaviors. Psychology's research ethics. LOQ 2-11. Why do psychologists study animals, and what ethical research guidelines safeguard human and animal welfare? How do psychologists' values influence what they study and how they apply their results? We have reflected on how a scientific approach can restrain biases. We have learned how case studies, naturalistic observations, and surveys help us describe behavior. We have also noted that correlational studies assess the association between two variables, showing how well one predicts another. We have examined the logic that underlies experiments, which use control conditions and random assignment of participants to isolate the causal effects of an independent variable on a dependent variable. Yet even knowing this much, you may still be approaching psychology with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. So, before we plunge in, let's entertain some common questions about psychology's ethics and values. Studying and protecting animals. Many psychologists study non-human animals because they find them fascinating. They want to understand how different species learn, think, and behave. Psychologists also study animals to learn about people. We humans are not like animals, we are animals, sharing a common biology. Animal experiments have therefore led to treatments for human diseases: insulin for diabetes, vaccines to prevent polio and rabies, transplants to replace defective organs. Humans are complex. But some of the same processes by which we learn are present in other animals, even sea slugs and honeybees. The simplicity of the sea slug's nervous system is precisely what makes it so revealing of the neural mechanisms of learning. Ditto for the honeybee, which resembles us humans in how it learns to cope with stress. Dingus et al., 2017. Rats are very similar to humans except that they are not stupid enough to purchase lottery tickets. Dave Barry, 2002. Sharing such similarities, should we not respect our animal relatives? The animal protection movement protests the use of animals in psychological, biological, and medical research. We cannot defend our scientific work with animals on the basis of the similarities between them and ourselves and then defend it morally on the basis of differences, noted Roger Ulrich, 1991. In U.S. national surveys, half of adults oppose and half favor the use of animals in scientific research, with support greater among those most informed about science. Strauss, 2018. Out of this heated debate, two issues emerge. The basic one is whether it is right to place the well-being of humans above that of other animals. In experiments on stress and cancer, is it right that mice get tumors in the hope that people might not? Was it right that researchers exposed monkeys to a coronavirus in the search for a COVID vaccine? Chandrasekhar et al., 2020. Human slaughter for meat: 80 billion animals a year, Ritchie and Roser, 2019. Is our use and consumption of other animals as natural as the behavior of carnivorous hawks, cats, and whales? Please do not forget those of us who suffer from incurable diseases or disabilities, who hope for a cure through research that requires the use of animals. Psychologist Dennis Feeney, 1987. For those who prioritize human life, a second issue emerges: what safeguards should protect the well-being of animals in research? British Psychological Society, BPS, guidelines call for housing animals under reasonably natural living conditions, with companions for social animals. Lee, 2000. American Psychological Association, APA, guidelines state that researchers must provide humane care and healthful conditions, and that testing should minimize discomfort. APA, 2012. The European Parliament also mandates standards for animal care and housing. Vogel, 2010. Most universities screen research proposals, often through an animal care ethics committee, and laboratories are regulated and inspected. Animals have themselves benefited from animal research. One Ohio team of research psychologists measured stress hormone levels in samples of millions of dogs brought each year to animal shelters. They devised handling and stroking methods to reduce stress and ease the dogs' transition to adoptive homes. Tuber et al., 1999. Other studies have helped improve care and management in animals' natural habitats. By revealing our behavioral kinship with animals and the remarkable intelligence of chimpanzees, gorillas, and other animals, experiments have also led to increased empathy and protection for them. At its best, a psychology concerned for humans and sensitive to animals serves the welfare of both. Studying and protecting humans. What about human participants? Does the image of white-coated scientists seeming to deliver electric shocks trouble you? Actually, most psychological studies are free of such stress. Blinking lights, flashing words, and pleasant social interactions are more common. Occasionally, researchers temporarily stress or deceive people, but only when they believe it is essential to a justifiable end, such as understanding and controlling violent behavior or studying mood swings. Many experiments won't work if participants know everything beforehand. Wanting to be helpful, the participants might try to confirm the researchers' predictions. Some of psychology's famous experiments used stressful and deceptive methods that are unacceptable today. These early psychologists deprived baby monkeys of their mothers, conditioned human babies to burst into tears, and semi-starved conscientious objectors. We discuss each of these in other modules. Today's ethics codes, from the APA and Britain's BPS, urge researchers to 1. Obtain potential participants' informed consent to take part. 2. Protect participants from greater than usual harm and discomfort. 3. Keep information about individual participants confidential. And 4. Fully debrief people, explain the research afterward, including any temporary deception. To enforce these ethical standards, universities and research organizations have institutional review boards that screen research proposals and safeguard the rights, welfare and well-being of human research participants. Niez, 2019. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. This video, Research Ethics offers a helpful tutorial animation. Ensuring scientific integrity. In science, as in everyday life, mistakes happen. When data get accidentally miscomputed or misreported, that's forgivable and correctable. What's not acceptable and will get a scientist banished from the profession is fraud. Leading scientists cite honesty as the most important scientific value, followed by curiosity and perseverance. Nature, 2016. To seek career advancement by plagiarizing another's words or ideas, or to make up data, is to risk finding one's career ended. This was the case when a Dutch psychologist fabricated data that made it into 58 research articles, fakery that was sniffed out by alert colleagues. Retraction Watch, 2015. Fake science also has the potential to cause widespread harm. This happened in 1998 when a now disbarred British physician published an article in the prestigious Lancet, reporting a dozen cases in which British children given the measles, mumps, and rubella, MMR, vaccine supposedly developed autism spectrum disorder afterward. Other large studies have failed to reproduce the finding. Replication matters. Hayat 2019. An investigation revealed a fraud with falsified data and the journal retracted the report in 2010, 12 years after its initial publication. Godley, 2011. Indeed, many studies of hundreds of thousands of children reveal identical autism rates in those vaccinated and unvaccinated. Immunize, 2023. Moreover, among those diagnosed with autism after vaccinations, home movies showed autism symptoms, such as less eye contact, before vaccination. St. George's et 2010. Nevertheless, the widely publicized fraudulent finding, the most damaging medical hoax of the last 100 years, Flaherty, 2011, had produced an anti-vax movement and declining vaccination rates. Values in psychology. Values affect what we study, how we study it, and how we interpret results. Researchers' values influence their choice of research topics. Should we study worker productivity or worker morale? Cultural differences or social injustice? Conformity or independence? Values can also color the facts, our observations and interpretations. Sometimes we find what we want or expect to find. Figure 2.10. Even the words we use to describe traits and tendencies can reflect our values. In psychology and in everyday speech, labels describe and labels evaluate. One person's rigidity is another's consistency. One person's faith is another's fanaticism. One person's adultery is another's open marriage. Our labeling someone as firm or stubborn, careful or picky, discreet or secretive reveals our own attitudes. So, values inform psychological science, and psychological science has the power to persuade. This connection between values and psychological science may make some people feel distrustful. Is psychology dangerously powerful? Might it be used to manipulate people? Knowledge, like all power, can be used for good or evil. Nuclear power has been used to light up cities and to demolish them. Persuasive power has been used to educate people and to deceive them. Although psychology does have the power to deceive, its purpose is to enlighten. Every day, psychologists explore ways to enhance learning, creativity, and compassion. Psychology speaks to many of our world's great problems: extremist terrorism, political corruption, economic inequality, climate change, prejudice, refugee crises, all of which involve attitudes and behaviors. Psychology also speaks to our deepest longings for love, for happiness, for meaning. Psychology cannot address all of life's great questions, but it speaks to some mighty important ones. Ask yourself, what other questions or concerns do you have about psychology? Review. Module 2, Research Strategies, How psychologists ask and answer questions. Learning objectives. Test yourself. Answer these repeated learning objective questions on your own, before showing the answers here, or checking the answers in Appendix D, to improve your retention of the concepts. McDaniel et al., 2009, 2015. Terms and concepts to remember. Test yourself. Write down the definition in your own words, then check your answer. Hindsight bias. Peer reviewers. Theory. Hypothesis. Operational definition. Replication. Pre-registration. Meta-analysis. Case study. Naturalistic observation. Survey. Random sample. Population. Correlation. Correlation coefficient. Variable. Scatterplot. Illusory correlation. Regression toward the mean. Experiment. Experimental group. Control group. Random assignment. Double-blind procedure. Placebo effect. Independent variable. Confounding variable. Dependent variable. Informed consent. Debriefing. Module test. Test yourself. Answer the following questions on your own first, then show the answers here, or check your answers in Appendix E. Continue testing yourself to learn and remember most effectively. Module 3, Statistical Reasoning.